This is Resolute and the Resolute Podcast, where we make men better. I am Vince Miller, your host, and today we're looking at the topic, what is Pentecost? Men, welcome back to the program. If this is your first time tuning in, well, thank you for joining us. Resolute exists to make men better because we know men today face unique challenges on the quest for godly manhood. Therefore, we desire to help men grow by providing them with a spiritual game plan that will launch them toward being better men, fathers, husbands, and leaders. Because we believe when you make one man better, everybody gets better. For more information on our program for individuals and groups, go to beresolute.org. We have numerous great tools for men on our website, one being our free Men's Daily Devo. It's short, straightforward, and sweet to get in your inbox. Please check it out along with all of our other resources. And now, guys, let's dive in. So what is up with Pentecost? And what does it mean? You know, for some reason in the church today, we don't discuss or define, I would say, some of the more significant days in Christian history. You know, Christmas, Easter tend to get a lot of attention and maybe some marketing by the world as well. But Pentecost is not a much talked about day, yet this is a significant day in the life of the church. So what is Pentecost? Well, this is a word that was born out of Hellenistic Jewish roots, and it literally means the 50th day, the 50th day. So day 50. And I want to unpack that a little bit more here in a second, but what is interesting about this day in history is that it collides with both a Jewish celebration and a major Christian event in the Bible. So really two things are happening at once. This occurrence actually appears in the Bible in Acts chapter 2. And I just want to read the first few verses of this chapter, and then we will discuss the collision of these two amazing days. So beginning verse 1, Acts chapter 2, it reads, "When the day of Pentecost came," that's the 50th day, "they were all together in one place. Suddenly a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. Now, there were staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. When they heard this sound, a crowd came together in bewilderment because each one heard their own language being spoken. Utterly amazed, they asked, 'Aren't all these who are speaking Galileans? Then how is it that each of us hears them in our own native language?'" And then verses 9 through 11 are a list of 17 different languages that they were hearing. Verse 12 reads, "Amazed and perplexed, they asked one another, 'What does this mean? What in the living world does this mean?'" Now, I want to make a few observations from this text because it's a very powerful text and it's very misinterpreted and it's very controversial depending on which denomination you're from. But there were a few things happening here. So verse 2 says this, "Suddenly a sound like the blowing of a violent wind." Notice it says, like the blowing of a violent wind. It was a sound they were hearing. They weren't experiencing the wind. They were experiencing a sound like the blowing of a violent wind without experiencing all the damaging effects in the home, right? So that's what's happening here. I don't know how many of you have ever lived in one of the southern states and experienced a tornado going by, but I have in my lifetime. And it's interesting what the sound of a violent blowing wind sounds like. It sounds like a locomotive tearing through your home, right? That's what it sounds like, without all the damaging effects, clearly, in this situation. Now, I don't know if this sound was exactly like a locomotive or a train passing by. I really don't know, but it sounded violent, and they heard it without all the impact. Next, you will notice in verse 3, it says, they saw what seemed to be tongues of fire. It seemed to be tongues of fire. Now this, we move from auditory sound to visual, something they're seeing with their eyes. They're seeing something that looks like tongues of fire. It seemed to be something like that. It was probably hard for them to imagine, hard for them to describe. And again, it's visual, but they're not experiencing like singeing or burning on their body. So it was like tongues of fire, what appeared to be something like fire shaped in the form of tongue or tongues. Next, you will notice what happens, the effects of the sound and this visual impact was this. They began to speak in other tongues or other languages. There's two forms of the word tongues here. There's one that's visual and one that's spoken. But they're hearing other languages is what's happening here. They're speaking in other tongues. And it's not non-understandable tongues. It's something they can actually comprehend. There's a mental capacity to this experience too. Not only is it auditory and visual, it's mental. People are understanding, and not just understanding in one language, understanding in a variety of different languages as they're listening to a Galilean speak, someone from that region speak. And as they're speaking, they are hearing it in their own language. Now, this is a multifaceted sensory experience that these people are having as God reveals the Holy Spirit to us, because this is the moment that Christians were waiting for. Jesus has just ascended, and he tells them to wait for the pouring out of the Spirit, and this is that moment. And to make it understandable and comprehensible, God does something miraculous. He delivers something that's unseen in a seen, heard, and experienced mental way. He allows their senses to explode in this moment as he manifests the Holy Spirit to the world for the very first time. Now, what an amazing experience. I'm sure this was. Breathtaking, awe-inspiring. And it leaves people asking, what does this mean? I mean, what does it mean? Well, what's fascinating here is there are two events colliding together. Notice in verse 1 it says that when the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. And then notice again in verse 5 it says, now there were staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. Now, this means that there's just a lot of Jewish people gathered together, and they're there for a reason. They called it the day of Pentecost. The day of Pentecost. Now, the reason the crowds were gathered was to mark the Jewish celebration of Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot. It's spelled S-H-A-V-U-O-T. Now, Jewish people celebrate this on the 50th day. Now, this is a major Jewish festival held on either the 6th or the 7th of Sivan, 50 days after the second day of Passover. So just 50 days after Passover. Think of it that way. It was originally a harvest festival, but in contemporary times, it is a celebration of commemorating the giving of the law on Mount Sinai. And this day is reserved for renewing a Jewish commitment to the law. But what is interesting about this moment is that it's about to collide with a supernatural event initiated by God. Jesus told the believers to anticipate it. He told them to wait. And in this moment, we experience the coming of the Holy Spirit. And on this day, Christians celebrate not only Christ's ascension into heaven, but the falling and the coming of the Holy Spirit into the world. Again, I would challenge you guys to read today the story in Acts 1 and 2. Acts chapter 1 and 2, just a few verses. Because on this day, we experienced an event in the church's history that empowered the communication of the gospel to thousands that were added to the church's number on what I call the birthday of the church. It is the day when whole communities of people started to accept and live by Jesus' message as they saw the empowerment of men through the communication of the gospel to the world, who then took a step of faith toward Jesus, and thousands upon thousands upon thousands were added to their number on this day. You know, Dwight L. Moody once said that there is not a better evangelist in the world than the Holy Spirit. If the churches today would just let him come in, there would soon be mighty work for Christ. Love that quote. Love that quote. So true and so needed. So, guys, today, Pentecost, for us, is the birthday of the church. So happy birthday, church. Happy 1,984th birthday today. And if you thought you were old, you were wrong. The church is older than you. So today, guys, continue the legacy by communicating the life-saving gospel to others by the power of the Spirit within you to those around you who need to know Jesus Christ. Well, that's the show. Thanks for listening. Gentlemen, as we close, I want to remind you that none of this would be possible without you. Your prayers, your financial support, and your encouragement keep us going. Therefore, we would be honored to have you consider a monthly donation to Resolute. Even a small gift makes a huge difference for men around the country. And through the end of this month, with a gift of $10 a month or more, we will give you full access to our 1-year game plan for men. This will give you access to our web portal and app, which includes lesson videos, podcasts, daily devos, and so much more. Just material to help you grow in your faith as a man of God. And how could you go wrong with something like that? This is a full-scale game plan that will guide you through a 1-year process that will pay out dividends in your faith. So just head to the website, beresolute.org, click the word store on the menu bar, and then select donation. All gifts to this organization are tax deductible. And guys, as I always say, I hope you enjoyed this podcast, but please know the time that we spent together today is worthless unless you act on it. Go be the church today. Do something. Get off the bench and get into the game. And I will see you right back here next time on another edition of the Resolute Podcast.